welcome to the latest episode of Lean and Leander, which is actually part 2 of my conversation with Todd Parton. So if you haven't had a chance to see the first part of this particular conversation, go back one episode and you'll be able to catch up. Otherwise, thank you for continuing to listen and hear the second part of my conversation with Todd. I hope you've enjoyed what we've done so far, and I hope you'll like the way this wraps up. Again, I thought it was a very, very nice conversation, but I wanted to kind of bring it down to bite-sized bites for you. So I appreciate you coming back, and here's the second part of my interview with Todd Parton, City Manager here in Leander, Texas. So it sounds a lot to me like in project management, there's a acronym, Moscow, right? You're probably familiar with it, right? So what is it? It's must. I forget exactly what it is, but I know the first one is like must have is the M in Moscow, right? So you would take a similar approach in that, there's things that we have to do. We have no choice. We have to do these. So I'm curious a little bit on the roads things, because the roads are something that affects everybody every day. You travel on a road, you take it for granted until you're, feel like you're in a rickshaw in Thailand, right?
Right.
That then you're like, okay, there's something wrong with the road, right?
Right.
So not that the roads are terrible in Thailand, just that was a good alliteration there. But anyway, no offense to anybody in Thailand.
Fantastic cuisine.
Yes, the food is great. But anyway, so I'm curious on the roads thing, because it's always struck me as one of those kind of makes you go, right? Because you're outlining some of the budgetary concerns and some of the financial funding mechanisms and all that. It's a very complex and very convoluted process. You've done an excellent job, by the way. I think anybody who's watching or listening to this will get a better understanding of just what those complexities can be, which I think is something that's missing from a lot of the civil discourse in smaller cities, is that it doesn't matter the size of the city. Those things are still very, very complex. And in Texas can be especially challenging because of the way that the legislature restricts certain mechanisms, right? So all of that goes into play, and kudos for someone like you to take that on. I mean, wow, that's, to me, I'm like, I don't know that I'd be so frustrated. I would be the worst city manager in the world. But anyway, so back to my point, the roads. So when I take a look at this, and this is strictly a layman's view, right? I'm thinking, okay, and I'll give you a real world example. So I live in the Caneros Ranch subdivision, right? And we've got Lakeline, I think, is the road that goes down that side, right? Lakeline constricts to a 2-lane once you get past, I forget the subdivision that's out there, but it kind of constricts down to 2 lanes until it gets to Hero. And I know that the long-term planning is for that road to probably end up making it all the way up to Liberty Hill at some point. It's going to be a major thoroughfare, right?
Correct.
So I look at that and I'm saying, okay, well, there's not a whole lot of, there hadn't been, now there's a lot more, but there hasn't been a whole lot of development out here. From an economic perspective, wouldn't you take into account current costs of supplies and labor and all that stuff, and maybe look at a project that in the long term is going to need to be done, and say, well, we can actually do it cheaper today than it'll cost us 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Does that ever come into consideration when you're doing that?
It does, but one of the things, and over the years, I've had a lot of people that say, you got to go build the roads before you let this development happen. But that's not economically viable.
Right.
Because we have to have the dollars that come in.
Right.
And so here's the question. So do I tax the existing residents to build the infrastructure that somebody else is going to utilize later? And that's the balance we have to walk. So everything I charge or that we bill to us as current taxpayers today to build capacity, somebody else is going to come utilize that. So I may or may not benefit from that directly. So the concept really is that we're trying to get development to a point where it pays as much of its own way as it can. There's limits in terms of statutory limits, with regard to what we can make development do. So there's a whole concept of takings. There's a whole concept of a rational nexus between what you can make them do versus the impact that the project actually has. And so that is that balance that every city, particularly fast growth cities, kind of struggle with. So citizens, we do feel pain because there is a moment of time where the offsite roadway infrastructure, we've got a 4-lane section that's narrowed down to a old county 2-lane section that needs to be widened. So there's that piece of it. The other thing you have to think about is if I go and I build 3 lanes of something today, I don't know if I really built the right thing.
Right.
It could be requiring 4 lanes or 6 lanes. So there is that overall implication as well. There's some areas where we've got some intervening development. We can look at some realignments. We can look at some signalization to help facilitate things as we kind of go through that. The other thing to think about that we think about, is what is the timing to actually prepare a project to deliver? So if I'm looking at a roadway project, do I need right-of-way? Do I have landowners who are willing to work with me to dedicate or sell a right-of-way?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we have to go through a process to condemn and take that? The design process, the environmental constraints, those are some other factors that kind of roll into it. So a lot of those roadway sections by nature and by the way, the need and the timing to design and build are somewhat reactionary to what we have on the ground. So in some cases, we can look forward, and you would do that in places where we're trying to influence things.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to create an opportunity zone for economic development, for example. So let's get ahead of it. Let's build some infrastructure. We've got 2 intervening pieces. We need to make some connections to help ease or address traffic congestion circulation. The San Gabriel projects are good examples of that. San Gabriel 2 will be an extension of San Gabriel along the north side, basically, of Palmero over to Reagan. So it'll provide an outlet for residents to be able to get up and over to Reagan, give them another opportunity for access. San Gabriel Phase 3 is a connection that'll go back west and connect to 183A. And so that project is about a year behind in terms of design, but it's an easier project because there's less topo, there's less things to work on. Mm-hmm. So that project is actually in design today. So, but we're probably another year out from being able to have bid-ready documents toward on San Gabriel 3. We're out to bid right now on San Gabriel 2, but it'll be 2 years before we have those roadway sections in place. And so it's about a 2 to 3 year design process. Then it's a 2-year bid and construction process to get there. So that's 5 years.
Right.
Right. And so, so we have to be spot on in terms of what we're building and where we're building it.
So I appreciate you kind of giving people a little bit of a, pull back the curtains a little bit, right? Because the reality is, and again, it comes from, I don't want to say an uninformed citizenry, because I think generally speaking, there's a good group of people in Leander who stay informed, who are engaged, civically engaged, who try to help move things forward, right? Probably a conversation for another day, right? Because there's things that I think that the city could leverage. I think there's really, really some very talented and very thoughtful, former CEOs and the things of that nature, people who are, willing and able with their time to help, right?
Yes.
And I know that sometimes there's restrictions there. There's legal restrictions. There's, the state makes things real difficult to do. But I always feel that there's probably a middle ground there, personally, from my perspective. And again, that's me having served on multiple boards and just found, sometimes it feels like you're just banging your head up against the wall because just nothing gets done, right? But that said, there hasn't been for a long time, at least, I can't say long time, 6 years. In the last 6 years, the experiences that I've had have been not enough information shared. So like just in this conversation here, the education that you can walk away from listening to this podcast is this is how things kind of work. So when you're thinking about Project A, Project Z, whatever it might be, keep that in mind, right? So when you're the request, the expectations, I think is probably a really good way to say it. The expectations from the general citizen in the city of Leander are not level set with the actual realities, right? And I think that we've taken an unfortunate process, and this is probably something that was set into action many years ago. Like the situation was completely different, right? So they were evaluating and making decisions based on a completely set of data points, right? Completely different set of data points. But the revision, the 5-year, the comprehensive plan, for instance, every 5 years we're redoing it. I was like, you can never get a long-term planning if you just keep revisiting the same things every 2, 3, 5 years, right? You're just never going to get there. And I do attribute a lot of that to it was a small town. That's just a simple fact, right? It was just a small town. They didn't necessarily have the benefit of larger planning processes or whatever. And again, it was rural, and they just didn't have the same issues, right? So now you come into a burgeoning city, which, to your point, planning for 250,000 people in a 39 square mile space. It's a lot of planning that you have to really have to get things perfect, but you should be tending towards right, because otherwise you're not going to be able to support that long term. And I forget the gentleman's name, but I was exposed to. He was, I want to say, the city manager in Plano at one point, and he basically said something that struck me. He was like, when you're working with a city, it's not for you. You're working for the future. You're not going to see what you do, right? You're just going to be part of getting it there. So I thought that was an interesting thing. Anyway, I'll stop there. I probably said too much. I want to circle back to some of that growth. And again, I appreciate you pulling the curtains back because that does help people. But part of that, in my mind, was talking about that rapid growth, and the way that the city can maintain the quality of life for everyone, right? So how do you accommodate, and, this will kind of hopefully wrap us up here, I think, but how do you accommodate new residents who are coming in and they have a completely different idea of what's going on? And in Leander, pointedly, there is a influx of a completely different cultural perspective as well right now, right? How do you maintain accommodation for all these new people coming to town and also the long-term citizens, like someone who's been here, their family's here, they're from here? Again, you have landowners and things of that nature that feed into that. How do you manage that? Like what you're, in your opinion, again, I know that you're not directly responsible for making specific decisions, but what's your thought there? Like, how do we do that?
Well, one of the important things for us to do is to measure what our citizens think and feel about our community. And particularly when the demographics are changing so quickly, age, income, ethnicity, all those things are important. And who we are and how we come up and how we're raised is a lens by which we view things and how we view each other. And so, and it's really, you say, well, we just need to communicate. Well, okay, that communication is an execution piece, but It's what are you building behind that? And so one of the first things that we're going to do beginning in the next fiscal year is a community survey. So we're going to go out and we're going to do a statistically significant survey of the community, and we're going to ask them, basically how livable is the community for them? And, what are the good, what are the bad kind of things? So that's the first piece, is tell us, and how are you accessing information? Where are you getting information? The other thing that I think is fantastic that the council has done, the staff have done, is they've implemented programs and programming that are trying to embrace the diversity that is present in our community and growing in this community. Trying to sponsor different types of events and different kinds of cultural opportunities to be able to express that and celebrate that within the community. And so continue to have those conversations and making our community vibrant from that perspective for everyone, having something and to celebrate that. One of the critical things we've talked about with the council from a visioning perspective has been, also kind of recognizing the history and kind of what the root of Leander was. Where did it come from? And recognizing that and trying to find ways to incorporate that into our thinking, finding ways to physically represent that. Old Town Leander, is a place. There's a lot of opportunity to create there and to recognize the prior history and those who came before that created this. Because as we're building a community now as a foundation for that next generation, the generations before built a foundation for this community that we get to take advantage of today.
Right.
And so it does. We just don't ever want to lose sight of that. It's kind of like, I guess our parents would tell us, don't ever forget where you came from.
Right.
It's the same thing in the city. Let's not forget where we came from.
Right.
And then as we evolve and grow, let's celebrate that growth. But we also need to listen. What do you need? How can we best, provide that? And those things are replicated in programs, but they're also replicated in things. They're replicated in what types of facilities do we build, right? So a park from 15 years ago isn't a park today.
Right.
The library, needs to evolve and grow, to provide the right types of services and to reach people in terms of what their needs are. Libraries are, I think, a prime example of that because, a lot of people, as the internet, was evolving and social media was evolving, we don't need libraries anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, we do.
No, yeah, no, for sure.
They're critical. And the need and the use of the library changes as economic conditions change, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a little microcosm of, I think, that overall kind of piece for it. So I think it's, and again, I kind of roll back to staff and council before I got here. They were already recognizing that, and they were already implementing systems and programs and creating, cultural opportunities to be able to embrace that and celebrate that in our community. So we just need to carry that forward.
And I definitely can concur there, right? Because again, I've seen it, and I've been able to be part of it in certain instances and involved, and in other instances, take part. I think there's great economic opportunity there too. So,
Right.
And this will be my only little pitch to you. I think that if we continue to argue over transportation issues, we lose sight of the fact that we are in a prime position to take advantage of them, right? Mm-hmm. I know that in cities where mass transit is key to the development of the city, key to the movement of finance, of money, right? Money moves around on mass transit, whether you think about it that way or not, right? I look at the event-based opportunities that if Leander can focus on that and really, really do that well, right? You are in an exponential space from a Central Texas perspective, right? You can look at San Antonio, you can look at Austin, you can look at San Marcos, you can look at cities in Central Texas have a very exponential sense to them, right? Mm-hmm. You can look as close as Round Rock. We just had the Labor Day Cup tournament in Round Rock in Pflugerville and Points Beyond, it's the Lone Star Soccer Club. That thing is massive. And I know from my perspective, I run a little tournament. I still run a little tournament in Houston, Texas. And I have an economic impact. I know that I have an economic impact. I bring in, over that weekend, just my little tournament, probably close to $70,000 to $80,000 worth of hotel revenue every year on a soft weekend in February.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So there's opportunity there, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. I mean, I love the fact that we're creating all of these, these festivals and these opportunities to gather from a communal sense. That's huge, right? I think that helps bring people together. You start having shared experiences, and it helps the community grow in a uniform manner instead of siloed to these, specific things. I love the fact that the city's stepping up and helping with some of that, right? It should embrace some of the other efforts as well, and let's work together. The private-public opportunities there are massive, right? But I don't see an eye to the future with that, because imagine if you had, let's just say, for instance, and I'll take like Dolly as an example, right? That could be a massive festival in Leander, and there's a train that brings a bunch of people up from the city of Austin who have money to spend, who are looking for experience, right?
Right.
That's the type of thing that I try to mention as many times as I can, because let's not lose sight of that, right? We tend to be a little siloed in our own community conversations, but there's an economic factor here that we're not taking into account, right? And I'm mentioning it because I want to plant the seed, and I'm kind of selfish in that way, I guess.
No, and you're making a very good point. And a little example of this, a small little example in Kerrville. High Five Events, which is an Austin entertainment group, but one of the things that they were putting together are triathlon festivals and triathlon events.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came to Kerrville and they said, we want to do a triathlon festival in Kerrville, Texas. You're like, okay, well, why? Well, we got the Guadalupe, we can swim in the river, and we've got the hill country, and we got all these opportunities to do it. So we got it launched, and it was amazing because that event became, I guess, consistent with the community image.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people of all ages, from every demographic you can imagine, all of a sudden they were out running, they were out biking, and so it changed a lot of the culture and a lot of the activity, but it also brings in 3,000 contestants, which probably bring in another, 3,000 or 3 people per contestant, so you're bringing in 10, 15,000 people, at the end of September every single year.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people, if you look at the demographics of a triathlete, these are people that are well into 6 figures in salary.
Mm-hmm.
They're driving up with, $20,000, $30,000 bikes on the back of the Audis. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
no, exactly
they're bringing a lot of purchasing power
Absolutely.
and they're filling up the hotels.
Absolutely. I
in
mean,
that
and I think that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? I think there's just tremendous opportunity there. And, honestly, I think we might be a little bit closer to that had COVID not I think COVID kind of slowed some of that thought process down. And then, the after effects of COVID, people having to leave or, whatever, it did it put a little bit of a speed bump in that process for Central Texas as a whole. But now you can look at it, and I know you can, I'm sure that you do. You look at Hutto, you look at, what's the other one? Manor, and you're looking at what they're doing, right? And you're saying, okay, and that's part of the calculus too, right? Like, how do we do something that's going to differentiate us enough to be able to drive, some mechanism of financial and economic impact? And that's where economic development goes a lot further than just, well, what kind of businesses are we bringing into town, and what kind of, how are we supporting that? Yeah, that's a big component. But, there's another thing here that, we need to be cognizant of and planning for. And again, I don't want to harp too much on that, but I appreciate you addressing it. I think it's important to kind of circle back around, and I don't know how long we've been, so probably this one's going to probably be split into 2, I think. It's probably too long to expect anybody to sit and listen to the whole thing. Well, we could probably sit here for hours,
We
right?
could. This is good.
No, I really do appreciate it, but I want to be cognizant of that too, and maybe we come back and visit again. I'd love to have the opportunity to sit down with you, 6 months, a year from now, and just like, hey, where are we now, kind of thing. That'd be great. Let's agree, at least in principle, to make it annual visit.
Sounds good.
But to wrap things up for this episode, right? I do want to circle back and just thank you for your time, right? Because I think you've been more than generous in not only in your time, but in helping my efforts to help people understand what some of the things that need to be done are, and how you do some of those things, right? It's a little bit of a crash course in city management, but I think that's missing, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you more than anything else, is to help fill in some of those blanks, right? There's people who make a lot of assumptions and a lot of statements without necessarily understanding all of the stuff, right? And there's a lot of stuff there, so I appreciate that. Todd, I think there's two things. Actually, there's one thing that I want to make sure to talk about before I go. I wrote myself a note, so I don't want to forget. The survey that you mentioned, right?
Yes.
I do have one question and one recommendation. So we've done I was on a committee a number of years ago. There was the Citizens Action Committee. It was Mayor Hill's committee. It was an ad hoc. We did a very caveman survey at the time, right? It was actually fairly decent. I would hold it up to the survey they did in Cedar Park, to be honest with you. But it was one of the things that I learned from that was that it's very hard to drive people to take a survey, like, the soft, the soft approach. You need to sell it a little bit more. I would recommend that there be, and I'm happy to help, if there's an opportunity to create some community outreach opportunities, pop-ups, if you will, to get people to take the survey, right? Like make it to where people can sit on their way out or into HEB and take a quick survey, right? And expand the amount of people who respond to that. Because you're going to have, in my opinion, humbly submitted, you're going to have pockets of communities that will not respond. And that's been my experience, right? So outreach to those communities specifically, I think, is key to getting a fully recognized, fully realized data set, right? And I know that you would probably do that anyway, but I'm going to mention it just so I can take credit for it.
Appreciate that. I'm going to give you credit for it because it was like this. It would have been a failure otherwise.
I appreciate that because I don't think you would have thought of that at all. No, I'm just kidding. No, I only mention it because I think it's really important. Like I love the 183 project and the process that's going on there. I have some misgivings, but hey, everybody always does, right? I have my opinions. But there's things there that I think are really, really important, and I know that there's some work that has been done prior to that that I hope you're talking to Andy Ice about what we did on the economic development advisory, because it's not a committee in the true sense of the committee. It's an advisory, as are most of the committees in Leander. They're advisories. But yeah, I hope that that's getting to you because there was some good work there. And the one word that I've heard you say today that I think is key, and I appreciate it. And as a citizen, I'm very, very hopeful and actually kind of excited and engaged in the sense that you said the word visioning. And I've always felt in the 6 years that I've been here, we don't do that enough. We just don't do that enough. And you have to have a vision to go along with the planning, right? There has to be an idea of what it is you're trying to achieve. So I commend you on that. And this has been a tremendous pleasure. I feel like I know you now. It's kind of like you and Mandy. I have to invite you all for dinner or something.
No, so wave when I see you at HEB. We're going to have to stop and talk.
Yeah, no, I definitely will. Now that I know what you look like. I mean, because your picture's a little, you need to update your picture.
Yeah, I know.
You need to update. You look super, super young in your picture. Not that you don't look.
No,
it's
okay.
It gives you a different impression. I had a completely different impression, which is on me. That's my bias. I guess I'm, what is that? I'm ageist in reverse, right? I look at young people like, yeah, you don't know anything, you whippersnapper. But anyway, thank you again so much for your time. I really, really do appreciate it. And for those of you who have, this is either going to be one whole long episode or we're going to have a two-parter here. I don't know yet. We'll get to the edit. But I thank you for listening, and I hope that this has helped you as a citizen here in the Leander area, in the greater Leander area, to understand what some of the complexities are and the type of people who are responsible for executing on that visioning. And again, Todd, thank you for your time. And that's it for this episode, or maybe two, of Lean In Leander. We'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot.